Okay, so welcome to the node.js Diagnostics Working Group meeting for February 24th, 2021. We'll follow the agenda that was in the issue. Before we get started, actually one of the things I'm going to do is I'll paste the link to the issue so that people can add themselves to the minutes as the attendance. But does anybody have any announcements that they'd like to share or anything like that? If not, we'll move on to the issues which were tagged for the agenda. The first one is async hooks, new V8 context promise hook. I'm pretty sure that Stephen, you've been working on that one.
Yep. So I was working on that a bit before Christmas, and then kind of took like about a month-long just code holiday. And now I joined Datadog officially on Monday, and I'm back onto this now. So on Monday, I dealt with the couple of remaining nits that the V8 team had on my changes there. Still just waiting to see if that gets accepted.
Is there any concern, like, is it just progressing nicely, or do you need other people to like say, hey, this is important? Or
I think it's pretty much fine. I think just because I kind of left it to sit for a while, it's might have to poke the people that were reviewing it before.
Right, sure, yeah.
Yeah, this still exists. Please look at it.
Okay, but it should just land as basically the way you think it's going to go.
Yeah. When I left it, it was like very close. So it's just like a handful of like naming changes and things like that needed to happen.
Okay, great.
And the node PR for it, I'm currently working on like redoing that. There's some small changes that need to be made to the node code, nothing significant. And I need to redo the V8 patch commit, which for some reason when I tried to do it yesterday, it wasn't applying cleanly. I haven't figured out why.
Okay.
One line moved when it shouldn't have.
Okay, it sounds like that one's well on track. Do we need to leave it on the agenda, do you think, or?
I can probably just bring it up. I don't know if we need to like discuss it at every meeting until actually like have it ready for people to review.
Yeah, that's what I was just wondering. Like, do you want to? I don't think it's a big deal. Like, we could leave it on the agenda, or we could take it off and you could put it back on when you want people to. Do you want us to ask you about it every meeting? I guess is the question.
Well, I'm aiming to have it like ready for review like by the time the next meeting rolls around.
Okay. So just leave it on, sounds like.
Yeah, we can leave it on. If it's not ready by then we can just skip it.
Okay.
At that point.
Sounds good. So, okay, anything more on that one you want to bring up before we move to the next issue?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, so the next one is number 459, which is seeking consensus, move node inspect into core. That one, basically, January 6th, it's like, unless there's any objections, we plan to move forward with merging node inspect into core. We plan to share a decision broadly next Monday, 1 p.m. So there were like 6+1s, no concerns. So I think we can just close this issue unless there's, something to discuss, people have concerns.
Yeah, that was my impression. Like the last meeting I attended, that was on there, and basically the decision was to just leave that on there because at the time there wasn't enough people in the meeting to really have a clear consensus.
Right. So are people comfortable? You know, there's been enough time. So I see 6 + 6. I guess like I don't, you know, is there anybody here like Legendicast? I don't see a +1, but and same with Gerhard. But it's, you know, I assume you two would be raising objections if you had any here.
So I'm fine with it, so no problem.
Okay, so unless anybody objects, I'd say why don't we just close it?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, I will do that. Okay. The next one is number 437, which is async hook use cases beyond async local storage. Again, I believe, Stephen, you opened that one, and the goal was to get some feedback to say, like, you know, what alternate APIs might we want to make available as alternates to using async hooks directly, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't really seen any further feedback on there for over a month now. I think at the last meeting I was at, we suggested possibly like bringing this up on like the Twitter accounts or something like that, a blog post, just something to get like wider community attention on it.
Yep.
I don't think anything ever happened with that.
Right. So do we want to kick that off and like basically write a blog post that talks about the issue and get it published?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to go.
So I guess, okay, next step seems like blog posts to get broader input. Is that something you'd like to write? You want, you know, want help to write, or kind of how do we do that as a?
I think I can probably find some time to write something. Yeah, not sure what our process is for adding blog posts.
Right. So if I guess like for the Medium blog post, what I usually just do is send an email to Rachel, who's on the foundation side, to say, hey, like here's a blog post we'd like to go on the foundation blog, and then they handle getting it out there. And so if you want to write something, I could then connect you into, you know, basically just to make the connection, if that's helpful.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so yeah, if you write the blog, so basically I'll say Cord to write first draft, and I'm happy to, like, you know, if you want some feedback or, you know, somebody to go through and read it in advance, I'm happy to do that as well. And then we can forward on to write first draft and Michael to connect with Rachel and so forth, which will just really be an email, so nothing really there magic. I guess you could even write it as a issue in this repo, and then everybody could sort of comment and give you feedback if that's useful. But
yeah, it might actually even be like a good idea to like have the diagnostics working group related blog posts like submitted as PRs into like a folder on here somewhere.
yeah, that makes sense to me in terms of a easy to find after the fact or something. Or
yeah.
So yeah, so choosing a directory that's just like, you know, blog posts or something, and then actually here, why don't we choose that right now? There's no time like the present. Or do you think just like a subdirectory called blog posts?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
clear what the purpose is.
I'm just going to take a note there into diagnostics. And then, once that's published, we just basically send a DM to the Node account, basically saying, hey, can you retweet the link to this blog post? Or like you can do a tweet and then, send a DM to say, hey, can you retweet this, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Good.
Okay, that sounds good. I think that's a great next step to kind of, if we can put together the thing that explains the issue, and then here's what we've got so far. So sort of like the, hey, if you don't see your use case in this, let us know kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay, anything more on that one before we move on?
No, I think that's it.
Oh, okay, here I need to promote Bradley. Sorry about that, Bradley. Then the next issue is node inspect, update, add black box by default. This is PR number 99. Let's go take a look, see if that's still open or. Right, so this is one I know Raphael was working on. I think this was based on an earlier issue. Right, so that's from that earlier issue. I don't think I see any updates, but I think maybe we need to defer until we have Raphael in the call. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm not really too sure what all that was about.
Okay, and that takes us to the end of the agenda. So I don't know if people had any other topics or discussions that they wanted to cover this week.
So it's not on the agenda. Is someone of you has used the ESM modules already? And
Sorry, using what?
the ESM modules, is someone investigating this one regarding diagnostics use cases? Because we can't monkey patch them because there is no loader. Okay, there is a loader hook, but they are still experimental and just a single hook is available. And yeah, so for all these APM use cases, which are a lot of interest here, I would say it's currently not usable. So I have not found the time till now to really dig into this. Has someone of you taken a look into this area already?
So the modules working group did spend time, and we wrote an example APM loader even going that far. The loader API has changed since we wrote that example, but we could update it. In general, they don't work how APMs work today. Because ESM is statically linked, you can't just replace out the values on a module. So in general, the idea is you can use a policy or you can use a loader. Both require it to be set up before any evaluation is done, because once the ESM graph is linked, it's too late. So you can't put you can't put an import at the start of your application. It's too late at that point. And so I would say the loader hooks are very unstable. There's a lot of pushback whenever we try to update them, which is unfortunate, but there are known issues with them. If you want more hooks, we can talk about adding more hooks. But the biggest problem with a lot of the stuff is it's simply due to timing constraints, due to how ESM bindings work. They just don't work the same as how APMs like to monkey patch stuff. You have to completely wrap modules instead. So if the APM loader example on GitHub basically intercepts requests to FS and replaces FS with a module that wraps the native FS module with your custom instrumentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I have seen this, and so in principle, it seems like you have to use the transform source hook to add your stuff into it, either do a proxy module or just add some source code into the existing one. And so my main concern is more that there's only a single hook available. So this means if the APM is consuming this single hook, then they are actually useless for the remaining world.
So we've tried to get consensus on having multiple loaders supported.
Yeah, and even if you have more of them, then the question is if you have more APM tools and then they try to modify the source in the similar way somehow. So this, in the end, doesn't really look like a stable way forward, I would say. So it's always a great example.
This issue is actually like one of the primary targets of the diagnostics channel work that I did. Basically, like just trying to sidestep completely the whole idea of patching a module. So instead, like you could just ask the module author or like make your own pull request to a module to just emit diagnostics channel information. Then you don't need any patches.
Yeah, I'd say it more or less the same yesterday on telemetry, because this is mostly the same, I would say, just not part of Node. But it's a model which can be used to send out your diagnostics information. But yeah, you have to convince the world to use it. This is the hard part, and I'm quite sure that it will be some sort of middle ground in the next years at least, so that monkey patching will not go away soon completely.
It's not going to go away immediately, but it's going to have to go away eventually. It's just not a safe way of doing things, and as we've already seen, like ESM just doesn't have a way to do that, and would probably strongly continue to push back against any attempts to do that for like basically all the same safety reasons that like I'm saying that like diagnostics channel is just a better approach.
Yeah, to this one I agree, but I also see the years between now and when this actually happens.
Yeah.
So just on the topic of loaders, would there be a better hook we could provide if you do need to change the behavior and not just observe things?
If
We can't let you use first class values. It always has to be string communication. So like you can't pass a function reference around for reasons, and we keep trying to move loaders off threads partially because of this.
If I would have an idea to solve the problem easily, then I would have posted it somewhere. And I didn't have the time to really look in that detail into it to dig out and find really the solution here. So it's for sure not simple. Otherwise, there would be already one. So
we took a few potential solutions to TC39 that all got rejected. They generally all shared the same name, unfortunately, called dynamic module records. That basically allowed us to loosen some of the constraints of ES modules. Unfortunately, due to things like Stephen was saying, the committee simply doesn't want them to be loosened, because doing so means the spec has to deal with a lot more complexity and potential error conditions. And they just would rather have an early error than try to guess what the programmer is trying to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Gerhard, is this something you're going to have time to spend more time thinking about, or I'm just wondering if you were just asking, like, has anybody figured it out since you're going to look at it, or is it just you're trying to see if there's a solution?
So a colleague of mine is currently looking into it, but it goes on slowly and slow in the end.
Okay.
And yeah, I was just asking if there's other work done. So because I'm quite sure in the end, all of us having to do with APM will need something, and it will be maybe conflicting what we do. So because this is one of the problems we already have now, that if you have two APM tools in the same process, then one tends to influence the other. So they work fine alone, but once there are others, then there are problems. And for the loader hooks, which is what is possible now, it looks to me like the risk gets higher that we run into conflicts and problems. But yeah, not sure if I can find enough time soon to really dig that deep into it to move this forward in a good way.
Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of time spent on it at Datadog, and that's kind of part of what led to me creating Diagnostics channel, even though like that was an idea I had like long before ESM, but it kind of like sparked their interest in it. But yeah, they're from what I understand, like their investigation in it pretty much came to the same like we don't have an answer kind of assessment. It's a difficult situation, and no one's really sure how to solve it in a good way, or if there even is a good way to solve it. But I'm somewhat thinking that like we're just gonna have to deal with like a relatively major change to how APMs work to just migrate to something else like Diagnostics channel that like it's very different pattern from what we deal with now. So it'll require a whole bunch of changes, but I feel like we just have to do it.
Do we have a write-up of best practices for framework authors for that? I know I hear Fastify has pretty much the best support of the existing frameworks, but I'm not clear on the exact mechanics that cause it to be considered best support for APMs.
Well, at least for the async hooks to ask database vendors, so database driver vendors to use async hooks. Stephen tried it in the past and the experience was not that good. And I assume this will be the same here if we ask them to use Diagnostics channel or we ask them to use OpenTelemetry.
Yep. Yeah. So the main issue that we like just Diagnostics in general always seems to have is a lot of our features are marked as experimental, and the community doesn't like using things that are marked as experimental, so we need to work on getting things marked as not experimental at some point. So like I already have some other issue open. Some are suggesting migrating it, at least async resource, to being stable, since it pretty much is already.
Yep.
And aiming to get async local storage to stable as soon as possible as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely would be good, because those I hear being used more and more, and but you're right, like that holds things back.
Yeah, async local storage is actually growing quite quickly despite being marked as experimental, just in contrast to most of our other features.
At this point, I mean, I'm not aware of any major outstanding issues other than, I guess, you're working on the performance, right? Is that?
Yeah. And like async local storage has been the default context management for Datadog for a while now. So there's like very, very major users using it in production, and it's not having issues. So
And we haven't changed the
In my
API in
opinion,
quite a
they will.
while either, right?
Yeah, the APIs remain basically the same for a while. There's after the initial release, there's like a handful of small like bug fixes, and that was about it.
I think there'd be
Yeah.
like, I know you got a list from Jarish in terms of like what we've used in the past to like say, okay, it's time for this to become non-experimental.
Yeah.
I have like my gut feel is you could probably make a pretty good case across that. Like,
Yeah.
especially, you know, if you can bring the, hey, this has been used in real life in production by the, you know, through the Datadog customers.
Yeah.
That given the fact that, you know, I don't think there's too much of it, you know, there hasn't been much churn. And if, you know, from your use and experience, you're pretty comfortable that, you know, the work you need to do to you know, continue to improve performance won't require API changes.
Yeah.
I think that would be a strong case to say, let's take that out of experimental.
Yeah. And I believe Vlad has offered to put in some time to deal with that like exit criteria stuff.
Okay.
So I'll check with him and see if he's doing anything with that.
Okay. Because yeah, that I guess that's a bit of an aside on this issue, but that you're right that getting those things to be non-experimental probably make a big difference.
Like that same sort of thing, like that same getting stuff out of experimental thing. It just kind of became a tangent off of that, but it applies as well to like diagnostics channel. There's been like some adopters of it so far, but eventually we will have to discuss marking it stable to convince more people that they should be using this. Yeah, it would be really nice if we had like some sort of like different status from experimental to like differentiate like this is not marked as like stable and promised forever, but it also is not like continuous code churn.
Right.
It's like async resource, like it's a thing that's like I think mostly only stayed in experimental because we didn't want to make any promise that it was going to be there forever.
Mm-hmm.
Not so much because we didn't like trust the stability of the code.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's experimental because the async hooks itself are experimental, and the async resource without async hooks makes no sense because you have nothing which consumes it. And getting async hooks stable is in the end hard because it exposes internals. But now with async local storage, we have the option that we have a consumer which can be also put out of experimental, which does not expose this internals anymore. So this looks quite promising.
Yeah.
Right. Like you're saying, async local storage motivates async resources non-stable as well, right?
Yeah, because the async resource as alone is useless because it just creates resources you can't see anywhere without using an experimental API. So
right.
Yeah, that and also like the async hooks API and the async resource API are decoupled enough that it's actually like entirely possible that like async local storage, we could rip out async hooks entirely and just rebuild it at a lower level and still have async resource function.
Right, and that was kind of the goal. So it's higher layer. So back to the original ESM diagnostics. I don't know. It's anything more to discuss on that one.
I think the key takeaway for that is like we could try to write some posts on, instead of using ESM, trying to write up how people are using diagnostics channels. to get the information that they can. I'm not going to say it's all the information, but it's more information than nothing.
And I would suggest if like anyone has time to like do some experimentation with diagnostics channel or like any like related sort of patterns or just like alternative ways to gather the like all the information we need from a module without needing to patch it. Just figure out like, is there any like deficiencies in diagnostics channel currently that would make it not enough to capture what you need from existing modules?
To my knowledge, the only deficiency is when you want behavioral changes. So some security products, not performance monitoring, do alter things. They generally throw though, which should still work in diagnostics channel.
Yeah, diagnostics channel. If you throw inside of the handlers, it just I think it like eats the air or something. I don't remember.
I believe it eats the air but sets something. The reason it has to eat the air is to ensure that all the hooks fire.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the diagnostic channel is not intended at all to do behavior changes. So it's just to monitor what's going on.
Yeah.
So the use cases for monkey patching we do now are various. So one is to gather data which is not available, to fix context propagation in case async hooks are not used or not working as expected, say for queuing or whatever. And also, if you want to do a security product or something like this, which blocks attackers or whatever, then this would also do behavior changes. And there may be other use cases. So, you know, monkey patching is done a lot in the wild, which is completely unrelated at all sometimes to the APM use cases. But the diagnostics channel is not intended to fix all of them. So it's just to get out diagnostics data quite similar to, I would say what OpenTelemetry trace part is intended to do.
Yeah. So that diagnostics channel is very much intended to be a non-destructive system. Nothing like no behavior of the source module should change. It should only just report what information it has. Technically, in some cases, you could like mutate data that's passed through if they decided to just pass objects directly through. But it's not recommended you do that. Yeah. For anything that wants to like actually manipulate the environment, I would almost question like, why do you want to do that? Why not just like ask the module author for a feature to change stuff through some API or something? But I mean, I'm maybe not aware of all the possible use cases outside of APM, so.
I just hear about it on the security Slack every so often. So. Just telling them not to use diagnostic channels for that seems fine.
Yeah, for security type stuff, like I would expect you'd probably want something a little more like hardened anyway.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I'm just looking, and Raphael's joined us. So maybe we want to go back to issue number 99, which was add black box by default.
Yeah. So I have discussed this issue with Mary, but we still don't have a solution. Not solution, but we don't have the reason why this not works for internal prefixed. The problem is the black box by default after node 15. The internal modules are prefixed by node, and we can use regex to match these files. This works for most of the files, but for the files prefixed with internal slash some other file, this not works. But we don't know actually if this is expected or this is a bug inside the pattern matching, and we are actually waiting for someone who worked in this situation to give us, I don't know, kind of like
feedback from the V8 team, or?
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Okay, so that sounds like a good update. Any questions or other things to discuss on that one?
Yeah, I think we can just, I don't know, mark someone, or I will comment in the issue regarding to this behavior, just
Okay.
a ping, and I guess that's all.
Yeah, like, do you have a, I mean, does Mary found a contact on the V8 team to ping, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so any other issues, or do we want to go back to the SM issue or close out? I guess if I don't hear anybody suggesting we talk about other issues, we should close out for today. Does it make sense? I'll take that as a yes. So thanks for everybody for taking the time to meet today, and we'll talk to everybody through GitHub, and then I think the next meeting is in a couple weeks. Okay, bye.
Okay.